Yeah, tonight it behoves me to discuss immigration in Sweden. Immigration in Sweden. Now, the thing is, Swedish immigration has become a kind of archetype of discussion of immigration policy, and the new flood of immigrants from Syria and other places into Europe, especially Sweden, has become this example of the chaos and disruption caused by Muslim immigration. Now, there's many commentators on YouTube who style themselves as bold, fearless truth speakers who are willing to tell the truth, even if it's politically incorrect, and boldly tell the truth about things the government is trying to hide. Now, what one hears a lot about in Germany and Sweden, for example, other places, is how there's been a meteoric rise in the number of rapes and associated violent crimes, and how this crime wave is being committed by people of Middle Eastern origin and North African origin, and how the racial profiling, the actual reporting of the crimes, and the actual profiling of suspects, in many countries it's become forbidden, or in practice not encouraged, for the police to mention the racial religious background of the accused, or not to mention the people who are actually found guilty. Now this has driven a lot of people quite furious, and there's been seems to be in Europe at the moment, there's quite a savage reaction against the policies that have brought about this migrant wave in the first place. I mean, you could argue that the decision of Britain to leave the EU was motivated by a desire to pull themselves out of the consequences of the immigration policies of the European government, because under the European rules, anyone who can get into under the earlier rules, anyone who could get into Europe Europe was borderless, and anyone could get into Europe could go anywhere and settle anywhere. Now that's changed dramatically. A lot of countries have simply seized control of their own borders, and reimposed controls. But I would, first of all, there's a great deal of howling and screaming on the internet about the Muslim demographic bomb in Europe. Within 20 years, Europe will be entirely Muslim, etc. But there's a caveat to be added, because Donald Trump and his associated people on the alternative media like Breitbart have been saying things like Sweden is now 10% or something, 20% foreign born, or Germany is now 10% full of foreign people who are born foreign. You know, foreigners. And then they talk about how there's a rapid rise in the Muslim population, but that's a bit of a half-truth, it has to be said, because in the past 20 years since Europe became borderless, there's been a great deal of internal immigration in Europe. And there's, you know, Polish electricians in Paris, and there's Poles in England, and Poles all over in East, you know, Serbians and Croatians in Sweden, and there's so many Romanians in Spain. And I've actually, when I was in France, I ran into some Romanians who were on their way back to Spain where they were living. This was in Carcassonne, but the fact is there's been so much internal migration in Europe from other European countries that there is now a large proportion of the population of Britain, Germany, France, Holland, which is foreign born, but that can mean and does mean born in another European country. So this rapid rise of foreign born people in European countries, if you just listen to the mainstream media, you would get the impression that they're all Muslims. All the foreign born people in Europe these days is all Muslims, which is not correct. There's a lot of them, true, but that's something that has to be noted. Furthermore, there's this intense, I mean, in America it's silly. I mean, America has, how Trump got everyone whipped up into a frenzy about, he didn't even say it, he just implied that, that America is being swamped in Muslims. And the press was talking about, you know, a small handful of Syrians that Obama was flying over from Syria. Now, for Americans to get uptight and angry about something that's going on in Europe is doesn't seem a sane or rational response, because America has no proximity to Muslim countries. I mean, it's Canada and there's Mexico, which is full of Mexicans who are Catholics. By far the highest proportion, by far, of illegal immigrants into America are Mexicans and other Central Americans. The Central Americans and the Mexicans swamp everything else. America is nowhere near a Muslim country. Yeah, there are sizable Muslim populations in, like, Michigan, Dearborn, Michigan, for example. And there's some Muslims, the odd mosque I saw in Chicago. But there aren't many Muslims in America. And the numbers aren't rising rapidly. And they're not trying to implement Sharia law in American prairie towns. I mean, there are, by far the Muslim problem is a European problem, because Europe is closer to North Africa and the Middle East. But part of the reason for all this bellowing and carrying on about the threat of Islam is just a continuation of the it plays right into the hands of the military-industrial complex, who want to keep the 9/11 frenzy whipped up to a peak, and frankly, one of the things that has to be said is that the Zionist Jewish people don't like the idea of large Muslim populations in Europe or America, because a large Muslim population in Europe is going to erode Europe's support for Zionism, and a large Muslim population in America would erode America's support for Zionism. The Zionist Jews seem terrified of the Muslim demographic bomb, but one thing that has to be mentioned is the Jewish demographic bomb. There's so many Jews on the east coast of America. It's astounding. I don't know what the official figures are, but on the east coast of America, from Boston all the way down to Florida, you can't swing a cat without hitting a Jew. There's I don't know, maybe on the east coast, I'd venture to say maybe 10% of people are Jews, because especially these Jewish sects which have hundreds of children. The men have, typically they have enormous families, like 10 children. And in New York, you can see these armies of Orthodox Jews on the streets. And their influence spreads all the way to the Great Lakes. The Jewish demographic bomb on the east coast of America is partly why the Jewish groups have taken over the Democratic Party, at least. They've basically taken over politics in America by sheer weight of numbers. 50 years ago, the people you used to hear about as being typical from the East Coast, they've just been bludgeoned to a toehold. They're not even in politics anymore. There's Irish Catholics from Boston, the Kennedys. The famous Kennedys. You hear of Irish Catholics in Boston, and New Englanders from Vermont, New Hampshire, and Maine. You would hear of typical. These were people who were considered typical of the East Coast. Pennsylvania Dutch families, Scotch-Irish people from Western Pennsylvania and West Virginia. You'd hear about black families from the Carolinas. You hear about the traditional families of the Carolinas, formerly English settlers of the Carolinas. You hear about there's lots of people. Florida was originally a Spanish colony, but what I'm saying is, you don't hear about Italians from New York. There's still heaps of them there. But all of these people you used to hear about as being typical in American politics of the East Coast, are they're nowhere to be seen. There's in democratic politics at least, there's almost wall-to-wall Jews, and this is the Jewish demographic bomb, which has enabled them to take over. But these people know that they are threatened by a Muslim demographic bomb, undermining their influence. And be that as it may, I mean, there's also the Catholic demographic bomb, which is represented by rising numbers of Hispanics everywhere in America, but especially in the West Coast, but especially and on the East Coast. There's a rising number of Hispanics, and so that represents ostensibly a Catholic demographic bomb, which counterbalances a Jewish demographic bomb. But I mean, a Muslim demographic bomb in America is the stuff of nightmares. It's absurd nonsense, like a lot of the stuff after 9/11.